Okay, I think we have liftoff. So allow me to kick off the webinar. My name is Tim Doberman. I'm the Director of Research for the International Growth Center, IGC, based at the London School of Economics. And I'm glad to have with us and with us for this webinar, Dr. Chetan Gate, who's the co-director of the India Sustainable Growth Hub and a professor at the India Statistical Institute in Delhi. Um, so I will speak only very briefly in the beginning because the agenda is to have Chetan lead us off with an overview of some of the priorities of the India Sustainable Growth Hub in terms of some of the issues and topics that are important for sustainable growth in India, as well as how we're thinking about these topics feeding into some of the research work that we hope ISGH can fund. After Chetan, I will then speak a little bit about some of the call for proposal details and the practicalities, and say one or two words about what, from our experience at IGC globally, makes a strong and compelling proposal. I will say this is being recorded, so we will be sharing the webinar recording afterwards. And we do have a live Q&A feature running throughout. So please drop in any questions you may have during the webinar, and we will do our best to answer them along the way. Let me just say one final word about ISGH itself, the India Sustainable Growth Hub. This is a new hub which has been launched late last year and based at ISI in Delhi as within SECFI. And we're very excited from the IGC end to be able to support ISGH in fostering more research in this space on sustainable growth. And we're really quite excited about the agenda ahead. So with that, I will hand over to you, Chetan, to take us through some of the overview for these call for proposals.
Thank you, Tim, very much, and welcome to everybody for this webinar. My name is Chetan Gate. I'm the co-director of ISGH, which is the India Sustainable Growth Hub, and I'm very excited to be here, very excited to be co-directing this initiative, which, as Tim said, is a joint initiative between LSE and the ISI. And I think given these two partners, we're really uniquely kind of poised to have a big impact on the climate sustainability and even finance debate because it has both institutions have solid academic backgrounds, but also strong linkages with policy. So that's a great way to leverage a lot of the research that ISGH will do over the next couple of years to influence policy. And that's what makes this whole initiative very exciting. So I just wanted to start with a few overall kind of broad issues on the aggregate economy, and then talk a little bit about the sectoral challenges, and then hand it back to Tim. So, as you all know, India has an aspirational growth of 8%. Our Prime Minister has said over the last many years that he wants India to become developed by 2047. And the phrase used is Viksit Bharat. Viksit means developed. Wants to see the India developed by 2047. And the numbers that are thrown out are that, that we want to see India be a $30 trillion economy with a per capita income of about $18,000. If you look at the last 30-year average growth rates, real GDP growth rates, they're roughly 6.5%. But to get to this 30 trillion number and to the 18,000 per capita number, we're going to need 8% growth. And that's aspirational and high, and we can't take growth for granted. But the question is, while the aspirational growth rate is important for becoming developed, it's important to understand that this doesn't get ahead of the sustainability issue. And so the key kind of, I guess, one of the main issues that ISGH will deal with over the next couple of years is thinking about how to get 8% growth in a sustainable way, and thinking about how to develop and decarbonize at the same time. You'll all recognize, and I'm preaching to the choir here, but India is amongst the top 10 economies vulnerable to climate risk events. We're already beginning to experience distinct temperature and precipitation anomalies. If you look at the 11 out of the last 15 warmest years since 1901, they've occurred between 2007 and 2021. And in fact, 2016 was the warmest year since 1991. So ISGH hopes to contribute to this growth objective in a meaningful way, keeping in mind the sustainability debate. Next slide, please. Now, on the sectoral path, and this is also an issue that will be of immense importance to the ISGH. As you all know very well, that India is still heavily a fossil fuel economy, right? So in terms of its overall energy mix, if you look at, and these are numbers from a very useful report that some of you may have seen, some of you may have not, but if you haven't, you should. It's the report on currency and finance put out by the Reserve Bank of India. I think it's the RCF 2223. If you look at the overall energy mix, fossil fuels-based energy sources, which is coal, oil, and natural gas, constitute the dominant energy consumption in India. In fact, coal share in India's electricity is very high. It's about 60%. But on the flip side, India is also a market maker in a lot of things like solar panels and LED bulbs. So when it enters into these markets, able to have an impact by reducing the prices of these things. So there's a lot of discussion in India about how to go about reducing emissions. Emission reduction means phasing out coal, and that may not be feasible right now given its development objectives. And that's related to this larger debate about who has done green growth, what can we learn internationally from a green growth model? Has green growth delivered? Do we need an adaptation plan? Many countries are bringing out adaptation plans. How do we bring nuclear energy to the mix and so on? And then, of course, there's this kind of lingering question about rising per capita incomes and the demand for energy requirements that will be concomitant with these rising per capita incomes. It's going to increase, the demand for energy is going to increase. And so there's this whole debate about what the right energy mix is for rising per capita incomes. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned in the first slide, climate change is manifesting through rising temperatures and changing patterns, right? Of certainly things like the monsoons, which has an implication for agricultural growth. And there's a sense how much this is beginning to cost the Indian economy or will cost in the next few years. One estimate places it at about roughly 3 or 2.5 to about 3%. And as I said, being an economy vulnerable to climate risks, there's going to be a huge amount of effort required in mitigation and adaptation. And because economic development matters, I think one of the refrain we hear from developing countries is that adaptation seems to be a bigger priority, partly because it may be a bit more growth friendly and because economic development matters. Next slide, please. So along with the growth and sustainability challenge, there's also the financing of long-term and short-term carbon emission targets. So we have a net zero target of 2070, and then we have short-term nationally determined contribution commitments by 2030. And these are rough ballpark figures that are required to meet these kind of commitments. So the number for the 2030 NDC commitments, roughly USD $2.5 trillion. And for the long-term 2070 net zero commitments, it's about roughly $10 to $17 trillion. And the problem here is partly that you do have fairly minuscule north-south flows, which are about $10 billion annually. So the question is, how do you finance these reduction targets, both internationally and domestically? If you look at the international situation in the last year or so, in India, for instance, you've seen, and other EMEs too, FDI and FPI pullouts. Many EMEs and developing countries like India have BBB minus sovereign ratings, which means that the cost of capital can range anywhere between 12 to 13%, as opposed to the West, like the United States, for instance, may be much lower, like 2 to 3%. So climate resources become much more expensive in developing countries. The financing becomes more expensive. And of course, climate resources become much more expensive because they are essentially more risky. So this is also part of the debate here. What's going to be the financing mix between domestic sources, between international sources? If international finance is not going to come in the manner that is required, and if it's largely going to be raised through domestic sources, then how do you do it? Do you do it through green bond issuance, to do it through transitional bond issuance, blended finance, private capital markets, and so on? So this is a whole range of issues on the financing side that will be important for ISGH policy inputs. That is, and I also think that the climate finance part of the sustainability debate in EMEs and in developing countries tends to be under research and under discussed. So this is going to be very, very important and equally important as the real side of the climate finance debate. Next slide, please. Now, on the positive side, the government of India has enacted several policies to foster long-term sustainable growth. So let me just give you two metrics here. For instance, the emission intensity of GDP is likely to see a reduction by about 50% in 2030 compared to levels in 2005. So that's a very ambitious achievement and a target, but it's on path to doing that. A second aspect of this is that if you look at India's electric generating capacity from sources other than fossil fuels, and it's likely to be close to 500 gigawatts installed by 2030. And it's therefore this target of 500 gigawatts is also likely to be met by 2030. So a lot of initiatives are taking place, and they are beginning to be put in place. Next slide, please. So at the heart of the sustainability growth finance debate, our sense is that investment will be the core of the new growth story. And climate action is going to drive this investment. And it's going to drive this investment for green growth. And the thinking is that if you have a lot of investment in sustainable infrastructure, then this is going to be India's growth opportunity over the next 30 to 50 years. And it's going to be a particular type of investment, which is going to have a range of macroeconomic implications. But the sustainable infrastructure and other assets will have both short-run and long-run impacts. It will stimulate short-run demand and growth and sharpen supply and efficiency. And this is going to be the growth opportunity for India. And not only for India, it's going to be the growth opportunity for other emerging market economies as well. ISGH is uniquely poised because the research here is going to be publicly available, and other developing countries will watch this space, and this research will be important for them too. So I think here, what we think is important is that it's going to be an investment-driven growth model, and climate action is going to create opportunities to drive this growth. And in discussing this strategy, this growth strategy, I guess some of the questions that ISGH research hopefully hopes to answer is to thinking about some of these win-win opportunities. So if you've been seeing and you sit in many economic seminars, there are always trade-offs, right? You have to give something up to get something. But what are these win-win opportunities? And what is the sequencing? How do you fund the improvement in the bad first? Do you fund cleaning up of coal first and then fund the good? And what does that sequencing mean for delaying the transition to a greener economy? So there are a whole set of sequencing issues here that are important in this debate about having investment-driven growth, but in essentially climate or green capital. Next slide, please. So let me just end by saying that on the kind of other side, which will be equally important for what ISGH will do, is that it will use its research, of course, to influence policy, to influence academic thinking. And as I said in the beginning, because of ISI's position and historic role in influencing Indian policy making, We hope very much that the research that comes out of ISGH is able to influence policy in government, in the Ministry of Finance in particular, in the Reserve Bank of India, and as well as in the union ministries. But the green agenda is very important now. And I'm sure these will be equally avid stakeholders in this effort, because they will want sources of research to help form policy. So that's at one level we hope to contribute. The other level with which we hope to contribute is providing regular inputs into the G20, into the COPs, into the larger multilateral meetings. And again here, not just from policy-driven inputs, but research that can be actually used and disseminated down to a policy level in multilateral meetings. Next slide, please. And the way we're going to do this is, as ISGH launches, we're going to have regular academic seminars. We'll have webinars with top climate experts who will discuss India's challenges. We'll start a regular dialogue. In fact, we already have an ongoing dialogue with key policymakers. And we hope that the research that the proposal process generates is ultimately published in top economic journals, which is going to be useful for pushing the field, of course, but also for influencing policy. And then we hope that the policy notes, simplified policy notes that makes technical research much more accessible to the layperson, as they can also be a kind of stakeholder in this research dissemination process. And then finally, we hope to have an annual conference every year that'll discuss the findings of the research that is granted through the proposal process. Next slide, please. So let me just stop here and hand over to Tim, but let me say that this is a very exciting opportunity for ISGH to discuss climate sustainability, growth, and financing issues over the next couple of years. And we look forward to receiving your proposals. And I'll now hand over to Tim to take over the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Chetan, for a great overview on some of the really important policy challenges and opportunities facing India on sustainable growth. So what I suggest I'll do now to move forward is really with this big lens of how can we, which Chetan left us with, which is how can we have India grow in a way which starts reducing the impacts that growth has on its environment, partially because of an objective to consider global public goods, but frankly, really just the wider point of local environmental degradation as in itself affecting India's own potential growth, whether that is pollution in the air or the water, or how changes in our local landscapes might affect the prevalence of things like heat waves and susceptibility to drought, so on, so forth. So on our next slide, please. So I'll just say briefly how we're structured. So for the call for proposals, we have a number of core thematic areas. All of these touch on sustainable growth, but in different and important ways. I will very briefly say one or two words on this, but all of this information is on our website, and you'll be able to see more detail on the research priorities and specific research questions that ISGH has identified for this funding round. But we're very interested in thinking about how we can boost productivity of businesses as kind of a core driver of growth, but also thinking in this context of sustainable growth, important issues like technology adoption, whether that's in agriculture or manufacturing or even services. Adopting technology is an important way for boosting productivity and might be an important way for also making this firm growth more sustainable. State effectiveness is another theme for us, which is all about the ability of the state or the government to deliver essential services. And some of these services may be even more important in a world of climate change. So you can imagine thinking about social protection. If there is greater exposure to climate change or greater exposure to things like kind of heat waves or droughts. What does this mean for the social protection programs that the government designs? And should we now think about other alternative avenues such as insurance and so on and so forth? And how should those be best designed and delivered? Among many other topics on state effectiveness. A third area relates to cities. Whether this is sea level rise or seeing cities as important areas for innovation on things like public transportation or electric vehicle adoption, thinking about the design of cities to make them be these bastions of economic growth and activity, while also recognizing that they can play an important role in both adapting to and mitigating some of these environmental externalities. A fourth area logically touches on energy and the environment. Here, specifically thinking about some of the points that Chetan mentioned on, there's a huge rollout in clean energy in India alongside kind of a firm foundation still in coal. So how do we think about this energy transition in the power sector? But then also, how do we think about um, some innovations like payment for ecosystem services, so incentives to protect the local natural world around you, and how can we design such mechanisms, and how can these be best implemented? The fifth area in particular relates to climate change and macroeconomics. This is starting from the perspective of recognizing that climate change is really a large scale phenomenon which can have implications for macroeconomic stability and risk. And this happens not only from the direct impacts from climate change itself, so climate risks, but also risks that might come alongside any necessary transition. So as the economy is shifting away from certain sectors into others, those changes might be having implications for the macroeconomic indicators that are important for for delivering sustained growth over time. And then lastly, we do want to highlight the importance of innovations or proposals that touch on data and methods in particular. So if you're looking at developing a novel data set that can be helpful for us to understand kind of at a better level than before the impacts of deforestation, or allow us to better measure um, the rollout of solar energy in India. You name it. We're very keen to support proposals that look at creating public goods that can not only lead to direct research from the team, but also be the foundation for further research as well. Next slide, please. So those are the themes. Now let me just briefly go into some of the more practicalities. And the key dates, as you'll see here, and I should again emphasize, all of this information is online in our website, and Anam has been posting the links already. So please do check there. But the call closes on July 6th, midnight, effectively, India time. We will aim to notify successful applicants in August of 2025, so about a month afterwards. And we expect projects to be able to commence if you are successful from around September. Unfortunately, the runway is a little bit limited in that you'll have around 12 to 15 months to deliver your project. So you need to have all projects be ending by the end of December. A few important notes on the eligibility criteria. Um, the core objective of ISGH is to bring resources into the already strong Indian research environment to boost that even more. So the lead PI, so the person who's submitting the proposal, must be based in India and have an affiliation with an Indian institution. It's absolutely fine and indeed encouraged to have kind of mixed teams where you have researchers based in India partnering with researchers based at other institutions in India, as well as in institutions or universities outside of India. That's absolutely fine, but we must have an anchor in terms of the lead PI being based inside India. It's important, there's been several comments in the chat. It is important. So the way this works is that if you are successful, the institution through which you are applying for the proposal will be receiving this money effectively from LSE. So you need to be a registered entity in India, and you also must have the appropriate um, kind of approvals to be able to receive financing from abroad. So we recognize this can be a constraint. But please make sure that from your side, institutionally, you'll be able to receive international grants. We do expect that the lead PI to either be currently pursuing or hold a PhD. Again, typically, this would be a PhD in an economic or related discipline. It's fine if you are not an economist, but we would expect that the research proposal you are suggesting is economics. And so we will be looking for that very closely. And then, of course, please do make sure that proposals you submit map directly to some of the research priorities and thematic priorities that we've discussed today, but also have provided in greater detail online. Next slide, please. So first, now let me talk about the types of grants we have on offer, as well as how we will be evaluating the proposals. There are two types of grants. We have full grants and small research grants. And I recognize both of these are kind of rather on the smaller side relative to some kind of larger calls for proposals. But our hope now is to just start with this wave at this point in time. So we will have full research grants, which can go up to £40,000, and then exploratory or kind of small research grants, pilot grants included, that go up to £15,000. So for both of these project types, we are looking for projects that have strong policy relevance. That is key. But also projects which come with a robust research method. So they need to have a research question, which is answering what we think is a policy priority or kind of addressing some of those issues that are policy priorities. And then that needs to be backed up with a methodology which we think is suitable for answering the question you have identified in a meaningful way. Obviously, if you're applying for a full research grant, we will screen your methodology a bit more carefully compared to if you're applying for an exploratory or a pilot grant, where we might be looking more at how important is the question you're highlighting, and are the plans in terms of which you're proposing suitable for getting a better understanding of some of these policy questions, with the idea of hopefully leading into a full research grant in the future. And so formally, we have these evaluation criteria on the right. And we don't have an exact weighting of how much one matters more than the other. I think they're all pretty balanced, and we give you a score on each of these areas, which is number one, alignment with the ISGH research priorities. Number two, the rigor and quality of the research design. Number three, the potential policy and academic impact. So how meaningful is this project for the ongoing debates? Number four, engagement with local institutions. So that should, by design, be quite strong here, given the eligibility criteria. And then fifthly, value for money. So we are disproportionately looking to fund research costs over kind of core salaries for staff. And so that is going to be a consideration that we have when evaluating proposals. Next slide, please. So there'll be a number of questions in the Q&A which we can answer on specifics relating to any other details on the call for proposals, which we'll get to at the frequently asked questions. What I'd like to now say a little bit more on for the last few minutes of my spiel is just some lessons on what makes a good proposal. Because I think often we see, for those that are familiar, IGC has been supporting research for over 15 years, including a lot of terrific research in India. And often there are promising ideas which perhaps aren't packaged well into a compelling proposal. So this is just some ideas on how to structure and improve your proposal if you're thinking about applying. The first and most important thing is to have a very clear, precise, and focused research question. Do not make the question too broad. So the question should not be, how can we expand solar energy in India? So that is a very important question, but it is not a question which is very easily answered. So we would like to ask, for instance, something more specific. What is the role of renewable energy auctions for solar in attracting private capital to expand investments in solar energy in India. That might be a more precise and focused research question that gets at the same theme, but allows you to start answering, to come up with a more realistic methodology to be able to answer that. And I'll give some more examples in a moment. But so the first thing and the most important thing is have a clear research question. And I would actually recommend in your proposal to say, my research question is X. And notice how there's one research question, there are not two or three or four. Really lead with the core, most meaningful research question as well. What makes a good research question beyond whether it can be answered is that it should be able to expand our knowledge base on a particular topic, even if only in a small way. We're not expecting Nobel Prize winning ideas. We'd love to have them. I'm sure there might be a few here, but the core idea is really, is this going to help us improve our understanding of a certain issue within India? There's a lot of contextual differences in India, and we want to maybe learn how a program works well in one area versus another. So additional evidence on, say, NREGA, on how that might help adaptation to climate shocks, even if there might be ongoing work in some parts. If you're doing an extension or evaluating a different aspect of this in a different state of India, that still is meaningful and a valuable contribution. The third point is that, as I've mentioned, you want a convincing and feasible methodology. Convincing in the sense that, can we learn something quantitatively about the question that you are studying? And feasible in the sense of, for the question you have outlined, is the methodology the right one? So irrespective if you have a well-designed quantitative approach, it might not be getting at the exact research question you've identified. And so you might actually, if you think about it carefully, it might actually be answering something slightly different, or the results that you might be getting might not exactly allow you to answer the precise research question you've identified. So we'll be thinking very carefully about that. Then some other aspects, these are not all necessary conditions anymore. These are, so the last kind of points are things that are often characterized in successful proposals. Often there's a sense of using novel data. So perhaps a new data source, maybe this is proprietary, perhaps this is kind of using or digitizing existing data, perhaps it's bringing remote sensing, GIS data into play, um, you name it, or maybe even something like using data from, one example is, there's some recent projects that are using data from Uber, for instance, to better understand mobility patterns in cities. That's an example of very novel, interesting data, which allows us to perhaps get at questions which we haven't been able to answer before. We very much encourage and look for partnerships with government or other relevant stakeholders. Because we care about policy impact, if you are doing a project alongside or in tandem with the government, again, this could be the national government, this could be a state government, this could be a local city government, that doesn't matter. But we're looking for if you can demonstrate a partnership. So imagine there's a local scheme to encourage the use of electric two-wheelers, and you want to work with the city government to understand some of the drivers of demand for electric two-wheelers or three-wheelers. That would be a great example of a partnership that would score well in our evaluation. A small point, but when you're writing your proposals, really, I would encourage you to make a nice structured and organized proposal. Don't just have one wall of text, have structures. So like one of the core questions will be about research design and your methodology. So have headings like context, data, empirical methodology in terms of like regressions or whatever, so on and so forth. To really break it out into clear chunks that set out your proposal, and that allows the reviewer to have a much clearer sense of how you're proposing to go about a particular project, and also instills confidence in the sense of having very carefully thought through the important aspects behind. And then the last point is we don't shy away from ambition. I think one of the one of the words that that have always stuck with me by Professor Chris Woodruff at Oxford is that research funding often is very much like venture capital. There's a lot of very exciting ideas out there. We don't know which research project is going to be necessarily successful. Sometimes there's difficulties in implementing an RCT on the field, which means it doesn't have the results you expect. Or maybe the partnership with government runs into difficulties. You name it, there's a lot of difficult things that happen along the way. And so we don't know at this stage of funding, is this going to have a high academic or policy impact? But we're happy to reward projects that are clear, well thought through, organized, and perhaps ambitious if we think that there's a good chance that this means it could lead to something very, very exciting. So don't be shy about kind of really spelling out the vision for this project and proposal. Next slide, please. Great. So I'll just give very briefly just one good example. And this is just in terms of a research question, because I think this is really quite key. So what is the impact of the EU's carbon pricing, so the carbon border adjustment mechanism in this case, on manufacturing industries in India's heavy industry belt? You could refine this even further and think about what is the impact for India's steel sector. But the idea is really it's very focused. We target a clear intervention, which in this case is the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism. The outcome is the manufacturing industries in India's heavy industry belt. And so that applies it to very specific contexts. So that already tells us we know what we're looking at, and that helps us think through what might be the possible ways to study and answer this question. Policy relevant, very clearly, this is top of the priority list in terms of trade and industrial development. It's very clear. It's not, a huge. So a bad example of this question might be, how will international environmental policies affect India's growth? So again, that's not that that's not an important policy issue. That's a super important policy issue. But as a research question, we want to drill down further in terms of what international environmental policy, in this case, the EU carbon border adjustment mechanism, India's growth, are we thinking about manufacturing, services, agriculture? So really trying to start getting more precise as well. And then the last point is it's grounded very much in an active literature, which is starting to think about some of these interactions between trade, industrial development, and environmental policy. Good. So that's just an example of a good example. I think we will, next slide, and I think we can skip Anam to the FAQs. I won't go through a bad example. But just maybe very quickly, let me run through some frequently asked questions. So to try to preempt some that I think are already coming through in the chat. So who can apply? Again, eligibility criteria, the lead PI, the person submitting the application. So in some sense, we don't do a hierarchy of PIs. So all the PIs are on the project. The person submitting the PI, it needs to be based at an Indian institution. And the other members of the team can be based in India, outside of India, so on and so forth. Please remember to check with your institution because all of these contracts will be institutional contracts. Please check if the institution you are applying through is able to receive funding from LSE. Obviously, we are expecting this research to be directly answering questions in India related to some of the ISGH thematic priorities. IGC more generally does have an annual call for research proposals, which is around the world and across the globe, and does not have as strict eligibility criteria, but this is a specific call for India. And so next slide, I think I've covered those. And often we get questions relating to whether we fund research on health and education. in most instances, no. And obviously, in this particular example, we would want you to think very carefully about how this might apply to sustainable growth topics. So in fact, allow me to give an example of my own research. I have an ongoing research project which is examining the role of human capital in facilitating adaptation to climate change across India. So I look at historical schooling interventions and look at labor market effects kind of 20 years on to see if those who have greater skills and human capital when facing a weather shock are able to perhaps more easily shift occupations or migrate. So that is fine. Like anything in that space where there's a clear climate change or sustainable growth lens. So maybe it's something about human capital and the green transition. That would be very much relevant and worth applying. But if it's just purely, say, on health outcomes or education outcomes, we typically do not fund that work. So yes, please do map onto the ISGH research priorities. In terms of the methodologies, we do not require you to do an RCT. If you can do an RCT or a pilot RCT, that's terrific. If not, that doesn't matter. What matters is your methodology convincing and able to answer the research question that you've identified. And this could involve quasi-experimental variation, more traditional reduced form regressions, or instrumental variables, so on, so forth. It can involve modeling, so perhaps using data to fit an economic model to think about or macroeconomic outcomes, or to think about alternative counterfactuals, to think about how a policy may or may not have had certain impacts. So all of these methodological approaches are fine. Mixed methods are okay, but we do require at least some element of quantitative analysis in your proposal. So a qualitative component to, say, frame more of an exploratory or pilot study is terrific. So perhaps there's a qualitative component which then leads into a small survey, which you then do to kind of get some understanding about the baseline characteristics of an industry or a context, so on and so forth. So that approach would be absolutely fine. So do you apply for the small or the full research grant? I would say this very much depends on your research question and the stage at which you are in your research proposal. And so I would suggest do not, so if you put it this way, if you the chance of you getting a small proposal is not higher than a full proposal. So we will evaluate it really very much on what you're saying. So don't think that, oh, I really want 40,000 to do this project, but if I ask for 15,000 to make a small proposal, my probability of getting accepted will be higher. So I'd really lead with what the design that you think is suitable for your research question, given the stage in which your project is developed at, and kind of have that guide whether you do a small or full research grant. But again, of course, if you're doing exploratory or piloting work, we would expect you to probably look at the small research grant channel. So what is the policy on paying fees for researchers? So a degree of fees is fine. We recognize that there can be some constraints depending on which institution you're in. So it is okay to include fees for yourself. However, I would say within reason. So this is not designed to pay your full-time salary to conduct this piece of work. We are primarily looking at the balance between fees and research costs. And as Anam has highlighted, please do make sure that if you are including fees for yourself or your co-researchers, please make sure it aligns with the IGC pay matrix as well. Good. I think we are at the end of the road on the frequently asked questions. Caleb and Anam have been answering several questions along the way. What I suggest we do now, actually, let me pause and I'd like to just reopen it up. Chetan, if there's any other points that you've thought of along the way that need to be highlighted at this stage. Otherwise, we can shift to just answering some of these questions in the chat online. Great. Okay. I will answer one question Okay, when you say the proposals need to have a strong economics priority, so let me give an example. We are, for instance, not interested in a study that looks at the best way to optimize variable renewable energy flows to ensure grid balancing. That's an engineering, an important issue for the green transition, but that is not research that we fund. So we are an economics research organization, and so you need to be asking an economic question. And economics is, as you'll find, conveniently quite broad. So that can be everything about how do we financial mechanisms to encourage technology adoption, to best ways to deliver programs for social assistance, to thinking about optimal public transportation routes to encourage the use of public transportation, um, all the way to kind of the kind of economic value and incentives for preserving natural capital. So all of these are kind of economics questions, but they must at their core um, kind of be focused on some economic issue. Um, so climate solutions case studies of specific neighborhoods in India is fine. So I think the case study approach, there's one or two questions here. Um, I would see the case study as being an important part of context and kind of contextualizing the research, um, and kind of almost that qualitative component that I was saying. So it could be you start with a case study of, this is the kind of experience that has been discussed in these certain areas. But then we'd want you to layer on an additional, say, kind of aspect to that. So perhaps the case study says, this is what we seem to have learned so far in this certain context. I will be proposing to gather more data by surveying kind of farmers that were affected by XYZ to better understand exactly how this agricultural green technology intervention did or did not make farmers more resilient. So you could start kind of there was this, see, hopefully you understand what I'm saying. So just having the case study where you do qualitative analysis on what's been discussed or said about a particular program or issue would not be enough. But you can use that as a core anchor or motivation to then perhaps build on an additional layer to study. Um, yeah, so can we submit agriculture-based research? Again, that's fine. I would encourage you to think beyond just, how do rising temperatures affect yields of this type of wheat in Punjab, right? So, I think we would want you to move beyond just the pure climate impacts and think about how does this intervention with farmers in Punjab affect the whatever water consumption for rice paddies. I don't know, but so kind of really focusing. So agriculture 100% is the key sector in this, but the question is really focusing more on interventions, whether it's on technology adoption or climate smart agriculture or credit for farmers, blah blah blah, information, all these sort of things. Focusing on that as the way in to study issues in agriculture. Um, so then. So yeah, so can we submit proposals for generating data, which have kind of future implications in areas like health, climate, so on? Absolutely. So I think if you're submitting a data first type proposal, please make sure you really motivate where the gap is currently. So why is this data new and novel, and what gap does it fill in terms of allowing us to understand, say, the implications of global kind of continued warming on hospital capacities to respond to extreme temperatures or something. I don't know, but so they really kind of feed in how your data set or your data approach will be giving us a new ability to answer an important question that we wouldn't have been able to study beforehand. Um, okay, so how many projects will be funded through the grant and how competitive? The reality is that there's a tremendous amount of kind of research ideas, research energy in India, and there are far more proposals that are attractive than we'll be able to fund. So it will be competitive, it will be difficult to secure funding. Um, but what we're hoping to do, and we're hoping that this is just the first of kind of a longer stream of calls for proposals that ISGH will run. And so one of the things which we will be looking to do, and this is kind of more of like a repeated game, but if you're not successful in this round, for those that we think are kind of almost made it but didn't quite make it to in terms of getting funding, we'd like to try to offer our support to work with you and develop ideas to perhaps allow you to be successful in a subsequent round. So yeah, so I won't put a precise number on how many projects we'll fund because that really is endogenous to the kind of quality, but also the number in terms of budgets and overall that we have available. But it will be quite competitive in my experience, certainly from India. Um, Wonderful. Well, we've answered 82 questions, which is great. I love to see all of the interest and energy. Absolutely fine for proposals to cut across themes. Many issues are cross-thematic. I would still, however, again, really keep that in mind that you want to, even if it is a cross-thematic issue, really try to be precise in what you're trying to explore in this proposal. You will hopefully be writing many proposals and papers throughout your research careers. And in that sense, you kind of incrementally build out your portfolio on kind of bigger questions and topics. And so really drill down to one or two key things in your proposal. We will not do subsequent rounds. So basically, the proposal you submit is everything we will get from you and is everything we will use to make a decision when we to evaluate your proposal. So there won't be any interviews or presentations, etc. afterwards as well. Good. I don't know, Caleb, I don't know if there's any other points that you've seen come up consistently in the Q&A that might be worth me saying something again on the webinar, or if you think everything has been covered.
I
No, I think, go ahead, Anam.
sorry, I was just saying there were quite a lot of questions on the managing institute and the type of managing institute. So yeah, I would maybe answer if you would, Tim, want to answer that.
Yes, so the institution, it can be a think tank, it can be a university, it can be a private research organization, it can be a private company. In some sense, we don't care. You do need to make sure that, again, the institution has the FCRA ability to receive funding abroad from LSE. So that's the main thing. Please look at the details. There are caps on things like overheads, etc., that can be applied. But yeah, the key thing is that you do have the support from the institution you're applying through and the ability to receive funding from LSE. And obviously the lead PI must have some kind of affiliation with them. But it's for example, it's very normal I'm just making up an example, someone from the Delhi School of Economics to be applying through IFMR to get funding to implement some RCT. That was totally fine. And that would be, yeah, great.
The only other thing that I would add is there's a number of questions that I would direct to the ISGH call for proposals page on our website. There are quite a few details on our research priorities, which have been touched on, as well as different kind of logistical things. So please make sure to check that. And if you have further questions, you can email ISGH that I've sent in the Q&A, and I'll put that again in the chat, isgh.research@theigc.org.
Yeah.
Tim, I wanted to mention there have been quite a few questions on templates for the research proposal across the 15,000 pound one and the 40,000? I know they're being answered, but it may make sense to just say it publicly so that everybody can hear that if it's available.
So yes, you can find this all online on the website. So please do take a look there. You can find the templates for budgets and proposals as well.
And there are some templates that are for off-cycle projects, but everything for this will be done through the application portal. So once you hit submit my proposal on the IGC webpage, that will take you directly to the application form, and all the templates, everything is built into that. So that's your one-stop stop for that.
So just one point on subsequent calls. So we can't put a precise timeline, but we would really be hoping to run calls of this nature every year at least. So we're working a few of the details are out from our side, and but our hope is to have something like this each year at least. So unfortunately, I can't give more clarity than that at the moment. Yeah, so just briefly on the point on kind of engineering type projects. So like if it's a purely, I want to forecast with new types of energy, like variable renewable energy coming onto the grid, what is the efficient dispatch mechanism, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's going to be too engineering focused for us. If you're thinking about perhaps what is the impact of new solar on, say, wholesale market electricity prices, kind of in the tradable market in India, and you develop kind of an efficient forecasting model that kind of tries to think about how wholesale prices respond to kind of increasing capacity additions onto the grid, then sure, that could be certainly something we'd be interested in. But really, again, there needs to be a core economic thing, which goes beyond just kind of grid balancing, so on and so forth. Good. Okay. I think some of the questions coming in now have been answered at different parts of the webinar. So what I would suggest is we can close the webinar for now. I'd like to give an opening if there's any final words from Chetan, Shruti, or anyone else that they'd like to add. If not, thank you very much. It's great to see this level of interest, and we're really excited to be able to kick off the wider ISGH research work in India. So thank you very much, and we look forward to receiving your proposals. So thank you.
All the best, everyone. Thank you, Chetan.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.